Welcome to The Explainer. How I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today. Okay, let's jump right into this. If we really want to wrap our heads around the modern geopolitical complexities of Balochistan, the daily headlines, the ongoing conflicts, the really fierce debates over autonomy, we absolutely cannot just look at the present. We literally have to time warp through its millennia of history. See, Balochistan isn't just a province. It is quite literally a crossroads of empires. It's a region that's been fiercely contested and uniquely governed since the very dawn of human civilization. So today we're going to unpack exactly how thousands of years of shifting borders and tribal alliances actually set the stage for the modern controversies we're seeing right now. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with its ancient roots and medieval empires, then cover the rise of the Khalid Khanate, and move right through the massive shifts of the British colonial era. That's going to bring us directly into the deeply contested 1947 accession controversy, which perfectly sets the stage for our final section on the decades of modern insurgency. Trust me, this rapid journey through ancient history is going to give you the exact context you need for the modern realities we're about to explore. All right, Part 1. Ancient roots to medieval empires, spanning from 7000 BCE all the way to 1300 CE. Let's start at the very beginning, with the dizzying turnover of empires that first laid claim to this incredibly strategic territory.
It's really wild to think about just how much history is layered into the soil of Balochistan. We're starting around 7000 BCE with a Neolithic settlement at Mehrgar, which is literally one of the earliest sites of human occupation in the entire region. Fast forward to 600 BCE, and the massive Persian Achaemenid Empire sweeps in. But, they don't hold it forever. By 303 BCE, following a peace settlement, the territory is ceded over to ancient India's Mauryan Empire. Then, jumping to the 7th century, specifically around 644 CE, the Arab caliphates arrive. They introduce Islam and conquer regions stretching right across western and northern Balochistan. And honestly, if that wasn't enough upheaval, by 1223 CE, a Mongol expedition led by Chagatai, who is Genghis Khan's son, penetrated as far as Makran, leaving this incredibly lasting mark of devastation. Now, what's super fascinating here is the demographic legacy left behind amidst all this constant trading of territory. The remnants of the earliest people in the region, the Brahui people, astonishingly retain their Dravidian language throughout millennia of these foreign conquests. It's an incredible story of cultural survival.
Okay, moving into Section 2, the rise of the Khalid Khanate from the 17th to the 19th century. As we hit the 17th century, the pacing of our story finally slows down just a bit. Because as the power of massive external empires like the Mughals started to decline, the region finally began to assert its own centralized autonomy.
Let's really unpack this crucial political structure that emerged, known as the Khanate of Kalat. The Baloch Brahui tribes formed the state, but, and this is key, it wasn't some rigid top-down dictatorship. A Khanate actually functioned as a confederal tribal system. The central ruler, the Khan, ensured social cohesion by essentially parceling out the spoils of conquest among the poverty-stricken highlanders. And in return for that, the tribal chiefs contributed their men-at-arms. So the really crucial takeaway here is that everyone literally had a vested interest in the success of the Baloch community as a whole. It took these loose tribal organizations and united them into a formidable, cohesive force.
And this entire system reached its absolute peak under Nasser Khan I. To the Baloch, he's known as the Great, and when you look at his record, it's easy to see why. He had this staggering 44-year reign that was just defined by strenuous administration, military organization, and totally unprecedented unity. He was an incredibly wise administrator and warrior. He expanded the territory to include Makran, La Spella, and Quran, bringing them all into his Khanate. This era really solidified the region's historical bid for autonomy and gave the Baloch people a powerful, lasting template for self-rule. Section 3, the British colonial era, roughly 1839 to 1947. But, well, as is the overriding theme of our explainer, external forces inevitably returned. Let's shift our narrative now to the arrival of the British Indian Empire, which drastically and permanently altered the balance of power.
The British entry into Balochistan was right from the start marked by deep distrust and sheer violence. In 1839, acting on completely false intelligence from treacherous advisors who claimed the ruler, Merhab Khan, was a traitor, the British actually diverted troops to assault Kalat. The Khan was slain in that assault. Historian George Bruce Mallison later didn't mince words about this. He described this unprovoked attack as more than a grave error, a crime. And you can imagine, this violent entry set an incredibly heavy precedent. The British had forcefully removed a sovereign ruler, and that immediately established a foundation of deep-seated generational suspicion. So, to maintain control after that, the British employed a very deliberate three-step strategy. First off, they installed compliant rulers. Second, and this is arguably the most impactful, they heavily restricted the Khan's authority over his own tribal chiefs. They started paying the chiefs their allowances directly. Third, in 1877, they officially introduced what was called the Sandeman system of tribal pacification. So what did this actually do on the ground? Well, it completely shattered that once unified confederal system we just talked about. By dealing directly with the tribal chiefs, the British bypassed the Khan entirely. This left later rulers, like Ahmad Yar Khan in the 1930s, holding on to this highly insecure, purely nominal authority over his own lands. Which brings us to Section 4, the 1947 accession controversy. That fractured authority we just discussed, it leads us directly to the absolute climax of our explainer, the deeply controversial partition era of 1947. Now, I want to lay out the dueling perspectives here as neutrally as possible, because understanding both arguments is absolutely essential to understanding the conflict today. We are looking strictly at the foundational arguments of both the state and the nationalists, without taking any sides. So the Pakistani narrative asserts that on June 29, 1947, the Shahi Jirga, which is a traditional assembly of leaders, along with the Quetta municipality, voted unanimously to join Pakistan. Conversely, the Baloch narrative strongly argues that members representing the Kalat state were intentionally excluded from this Shahi Jirga vote. They claim that only representatives from British-leased parts of the province actually got to vote, which, in their view, makes the announcement manipulated and entirely non-representative of the masses. While this intense debate over the vote raged on, the ruler of Kalat, Ahmad Yar Khan, was actually holding off on a full accession. He was really hoping for a treaty instead. But look at the incredible pressures mounting against him behind the scenes. First, Pakistani officials allowed Kalat's feudatory states, Lasbela, Quran, and Makran, to accede to Pakistan separately. Geographically, this instantly left Kalat totally landlocked, with zero access to the sea. Second, a massive crisis emerged. The Khan had stopped food supplies to the Makran levy corps, which led Pakistan to threaten to step in and assume direct administration over Makran due to imminent starvation. And the final straw? On March 27, 1948, All India Radio broadcast a totally false report claiming that Kalat had offered accession to India. Talk about being backed into a corner, right? Cornered by frantic political maneuvers, geographical isolation, and what he firmly believed was an existential threat, the Khan signed the Instrument of Accession to Pakistan that exact same day.
Section 5, Decades of Modern Insurgency from 1948 to the present. And the friction of that highly specific moment in 1947, it connects directly to the massive waves of armed resistance that followed.
Seriously, the ink was barely even dry on that accession document when the very first insurgency kicked off. In July 1948, the Khan's own brother, Prince Abdul Karim, revolted against the accession. He actually took refuge in Afghanistan and waged an unconventional battle against Pakistan from there. Even though he eventually surrendered in 1950 after fighting what was largely a lone battle, this moment set a really powerful, tragic pattern of cyclical conflict. It was closely followed by the 1958 guerrilla war led by Naroz Khan against the federal one-unit policy, and later by the massive 1973 armed insurgency that sadly saw thousands of casualties on both sides. Fast forward to the fifth conflict, which ignited in the mid-2000s. By this point, those ancient desires for tribal autonomy had clearly evolved into very modern economic and territorial demands. In 2005, Baloch political leaders, including Nawab Akbar Khan Bukti, presented a very specific 15-point agenda to the Pakistani government. Their demands were crystal clear. They wanted greater provincial control of their local resources, direct revenue sharing from massive regional projects like the Sui gas fields, and a total moratorium on the construction of federal military bases in the province. Tensions absolutely skyrocketed, eventually escalating into the severe military conflict that culminated in the death of the 79-year-old Bukti in 2006.
So, considering all this heavy historical baggage, what do the people actually living in Balochistan feel today? Well, part of the answer lies in this really fascinating data point, 58%. According to a 2009 survey by the Pew Research Center, 58% of respondents in Balochistan chose Pakistani as their primary mode of identification. Meanwhile, 32% shows their ethnicity first, and 10% shows both equally. It just goes to show this incredibly complex layer of national identity that so often gets lost in the sensational headlines of insurgency.
And we can actually refine that understanding even further. If we strip away the loud political rhetoric and just objectively look at what the people report wanting, 67% favor greater provincial autonomy, meaning staying within the state of Pakistan, but with more local power, while 33% favor outright independence. It vividly illustrates this strong, overwhelming desire for local control, really echoing back to the old days of the Kalat Khanate, though notably it doesn't necessarily show majority mandate for full secession. Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought. Ask yourself, does the path to peace in Balochistan lie in finally addressing this deep, millennia-old historical desire for autonomy? Or does the sheer geographical legacy of being a crossroads of empires guarantee perpetual friction? I really challenge you to view the current events coming out of this incredibly complex region not just as modern political disputes, but through the long lens of thousands of years of history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.